My daughter didn't show up at the hospital when they called to inform her about my heart attack. Instead, her fiancé decided to post a photograph online with a particularly heartless caption. Finally, a day without the drama queen. In a fit of cold fury, I made a single phone call and liquidated the very asset they were banking on inheriting. Let's see who's being dramatic now. The incessant beeping refused to cease. That monotonous, mechanical rhythm was what pulled me back from a place that felt both dark and utterly without substance. My eyelids were rough, like sandpaper scraping against my eyeballs. As I willed them to open, I saw white ceiling tiles and smelled a sharp disinfectant scent, laced with something vaguely metallic. I was in a hospital. "Miss Gable, it's good to see you're finally awake." A woman dressed in scrubs was leaning over my bed. Her dark hair was neatly gathered in a ponytail, and she offered a professional smile, but her eyes conveyed a genuine warmth that was hard to miss. Her name tag identified her as Sarah Chen, RN. What? What happened? My voice was barely a whisper, a dry croak. I felt a slight tug in my arm and noticed an IV line snaking its way up to a hanging bag of clear liquid. "Where am I?" "You're at Oakwood General Hospital. You suffered a heart attack while you were at work this afternoon." Sarah was checking a monitor next to my bed, her fingers gliding across buttons I couldn't make out. "The ambulance brought you in just after noon. You've been unconscious for a couple of hours." A heart attack. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. I tried to push myself up, but Sarah's gentle but firm hand pressed me back against the pillows. "Easy. Now, you must rest." She pulled a visitor's chair closer to the bed. "We contacted your daughter, Clara. She's listed as your emergency contact." Thank God. Clara would be here any minute. I could already picture her, pacing restlessly in the corridor, wearing that specific worried frown she always got whenever I had so much as a minor cold. She would certainly insist on staying overnight, trying to sleep in one of those horribly uncomfortable chairs that hospitals provide for family members. She mentioned she was busy and wouldn't be able to come. The beeping of the monitor beside me seemed to stutter for a moment. "What?" Sarah's professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second. We made the seriousness of the situation clear, but she said she had prior commitments today. "That's not possible," I insisted, my chest constricting for reasons that had nothing to do with my heart condition. "She doesn't work on Thursdays. It's her day off. She uses Thursdays to clean her apartment and do laundry." The nurse's eyes filled with a soft pity, the kind of look I had seen directed at strangers but never at myself. "I am truly sorry, Ms. Gable. Families can react in unexpected ways during medical emergencies. Shock can manifest in many different forms." Shock, of course. That had to be the explanation. Clara was probably at her apartment right now, too overcome with panic to even consider driving. She had always been anxious around hospitals, a fear that had taken root when her father, Robert, passed away in one 3 years ago. Maybe she was calling Marcus, her fiancé, asking him to bring her here. Maybe she was just paralyzed by fear. "Could I?" I gestured feebly toward the bedside table. "Could I please have my phone?" Sarah looked hesitant for a moment. Then she opened the drawer and retrieved it for me. "Only for a few minutes. You truly need to focus on resting." The phone felt unusually heavy in my hand. Or perhaps my hands were just that much weaker. The screen lit up, showing 17 missed calls from my office and 4 from my friend David. But not a single one from Clara. There wasn't even a text message asking if I was all right. The number we dialed was the correct one, wasn't it? Sarah asked, pausing by the door as she prepared to leave. "The one you provided as your emergency contact?" "Yes," I confirmed, my gaze fixed on Clara's contact photo. It was a picture of her from last Christmas, laughing, wearing the beautiful cashmere sweater I had bought for her. That is definitely her number. I'll be back in an hour to check on you, Sarah said softly. Please. Try to get some sleep, Ms. Gable. Your body has been through a lot and needs time to recover. The door closed with a gentle click, leaving me alone with the rhythmic beeping of the machines and a deepening void inside me that had nothing to do with my damaged heart. I looked at my phone again, my thumb hovering over Clara's name. She always, without fail, answered my calls by the second ring. Always. Perhaps the hospital staff had made a mistake. Perhaps their system had the wrong number. Perhaps. I pressed the call button. My finger trembled slightly as I tapped Clara's name on the screen. The IV line in my arm tugged as I shifted my position. A sharp, unwelcome reminder of where I was and what had happened. One ring, then two. She would always pick up by now. Her voice a cheerful, "Hi, Mom," that could instantly make my worst days better. Ring 3, 4, 5. The call went to her voicemail. Her recorded voice, from months ago, sounded hollow and distant. "You've reached Clara. Please leave a message." "Clara, it's Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm at the hospital, Oakwood General. In room 247. The doctors are saying I had a heart attack. Please. Call me back as soon as you get this." I ended the call and, out of pure desperation, dialed again immediately. The result was the same. Voicemail. This time, I didn't bother leaving a message. Instead, I navigated to my text messages, my fingers feeling clumsy and uncooperative as they moved across the small screen. The IV made every small movement feel awkward, and a dull ache resonated in my chest with each breath. Had heart attack. In hospital. Please call. I hit send. The small check mark appeared, confirming it had been delivered. I stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 little dots that would signal she was typing a reply. Nothing appeared. Maybe her phone was on silent. Thursday was her cleaning day. After all, she often complained that the vacuum cleaner was too loud to hear her phone ring. She could be upstairs, with her earbuds in, scrubbing her bathroom while listening to one of those true crime podcasts she was so fond of. She would see the messages later, in an hour or two, and then she would panic and come rushing over. But Clara never put her phone on silent during the day. "What if there's an emergency with you, Mom?" she had asked, just last month, when I suggested she take a break from the constant stream of notifications. I typed out another message. "Please respond." Then, scared. The word looked so small and weak on the screen, but it was the unvarnished truth. I sent it. The minutes dragged on interminably. I checked the message status again. Delivered, but not read. How could that be? Clara was perpetually on her phone. Marcus was always complaining about it, saying she was addicted to social media and couldn't set the device down for 5 minutes. My chest tightened again, and the monitor's beeping sped up in response. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, just as the cardiologist had instructed me years ago during a previous health scare. This is just anxiety, I told myself. A perfectly normal reaction after a major cardiac event. I scrolled through my contacts, searching for someone else to call. David would come, but he was a realtor, and was most likely in the middle of a property showing. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, would be here in 10 minutes if I asked. But her first question would be why my own daughter wasn't by my side. Perhaps I could call Marcus directly. He might know where Clara was, or at least have a plausible explanation. But something held me back. If Clara wasn't answering her mother's calls after a heart attack, there had to be a reason. And calling her fiancé to inquire about her whereabouts felt like crossing a line I couldn't define. I opened Facebook instead. Clara documented everything there. What she had for breakfast, pictures of their cat, complaints about the weather. If she was dealing with some other crisis that was preventing her from answering her phone, she would have almost certainly posted about it. Her most recent post was from Tuesday. A photo of a homemade lasagna with the caption, "Trying a new recipe." It had 37 likes, one of them from me. There was nothing more recent. No posts about any emergencies, no status updates about being busy or having phone trouble. Her profile was a picture of normal life, except for the glaring silence of the past 2 days. I navigated to Marcus's profile, something I rarely ever did. His posts were typically sarcastic memes or complaints about his freelance clients. But maybe he had shared something that would explain Clara's absence. His most recent post was from just 2 hours ago. The timestamp on his post made my blood run cold. 1:47 p.m. That was the exact time I was being rushed to the hospital, when the paramedics were loading me into the ambulance as my colleagues watched from the office parking lot. The photo was of 2 cocktail glasses on what I recognized as their kitchen counter. They were fancy-looking drinks, garnished with little paper umbrellas. The kind Clara always ordered when we went out for her birthday. Ice cubes glistened in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through their kitchen window. The caption underneath read, "Finally, a day without the drama queen." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I read it again. With trembling fingers, I took a screenshot, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Drama queen. They were talking about me. It had to be me. Who else could they possibly mean? Clara had never spoken of any other dramatic people in her life. Her friends were all suburban mothers who talked about school districts and swapped recipes. The timestamp was undeniable, posted at 1:47 p.m. At the very moment I was being loaded into an ambulance. At the moment my heart had literally stopped beating for 37 seconds, according to the paramedic who briefed the emergency room staff. While I was dying, my daughter and her fiancé were mixing cocktails and celebrating my absence. I scrolled down to see the likes on the post. There were neighbors I had helped with yard work, Clara's college friends, who had always been so polite to me during family gatherings. These were people who knew me, who knew I was Clara's mother, and they were all laughing along with this cruel joke about the drama queen. How long had this been going on? How many conversations had taken place behind my back, painting me as some sort of burden they had to endure? The phone felt slippery in my sweaty palm. I caught it just before it fell, but my chest was on fire now. A completely different kind of pain from the heart attack. This was a deeper, more corrosive pain, spreading through my ribs like acid. The hospital had called Clara. They had told her I'd had a heart attack, that I was unconscious, that her mother was on the verge of death, and her response had been that she was busy. She wasn't busy. She was free. Free to make cocktails and post jokes online about being rid of the drama queen. My fingers found the screenshot I had taken. I zoomed in on the laughing emojis in the comments. Each one felt like a slap in the face. Clara had taught me how to use emojis. She had spent a good 20 minutes last year patiently showing me what each one meant. The crying laughing face means something is really, really funny, Mom. Really, really funny. My heart attack was really, really funny to them. I thought about all the times I had helped them. The down payment on their first apartment, 15, zero taken directly from my retirement savings. The car repairs I paid for when Marcus's freelance work slowed down last winter. The weekly grocery shopping I did for them when Clara complained of a bad back. The countless times I had dropped everything to answer their calls. Mom, can you watch the cat while we go away for the weekend? Mom, our garbage disposal is making a weird noise. Can you look at it? Mom, we're a little short on the utility bill this month. And I had done it all without a second thought, because that's what mothers do. That's what family is supposed to mean. But to them, apparently, I was just a drama queen. Someone whose medical emergency was an inconvenience. Someone whose brush with death was a cause for celebration. The cocktail glasses in the photo looked expensive, likely purchased with the money I had given them for groceries just last month. I stared at the post until the words swam before my eyes. Until the afternoon sun slanting through my hospital window felt as cold as a winter night. Finally, a day without the drama queen. The monitor beside my bed dutifully registered my accelerating heart rate, but I barely registered its frantic beeps. All I could hear was the echo of words I was never meant to read, a truth I was never supposed to uncover. They were not coming. Neither of them. And for the first time in my 68 years on this earth, I was completely and utterly alone. Drama queen. The words reverberated in my mind, a diagnosis more devastating than any doctor could give. I placed my phone on the bedside table, my hand shaking from something other than the medication they had given me. The IV tube swayed with the motion, a plastic tether reminding me of how fragile my world had suddenly become. When was the last time Clara had called just to see how I was? Not because she needed money, not because there was some new crisis that required my immediate assistance or my checkbook, but simply to ask about my day. I couldn't recall. The monitor's beeping grew louder, keeping pace with the rhythm of memories I had been too blind to properly interpret. 6 months ago, Clara's voice on the phone, thick with manufactured tears. "Mom, we're behind on the rent. The landlord is threatening to evict us in 3 days. I know it's a huge ask, but you're the only family we have left." $1,500. I had driven to the bank that very afternoon. 4 months later, another phone call, a different crisis, but the same note of desperation. "Marcus landed this incredible project, but the client won't pay until it's complete. We can't even afford to buy groceries, Mom. Could you just help us out until the payment comes through?" $800 for groceries that seemed to disappear just as quickly as the previous months. My throat was parched. I reached for the plastic cup of water on the table, the material feeling strange and foreign against my lips. Everything in this room was foreign, sterile, designed for emergencies, just like the emergencies that brought my daughter to my doorstep with increasing regularity. "You understand, don't you, Mom?" Dad always said. "Family comes first." That line was from 2 months ago. Clara had been standing in my kitchen, her eyes suspiciously red-rimmed, one hand resting on the counter where Robert used to roll out pie dough. With Dad gone, we're all each other has. He would want you to help us. She was using Robert's memory like a credit card, running up a debt of guilt. I had given them $1,200 that time, telling myself it was what Robert would have wanted. The most recent call replayed in my mind with painful clarity. Last Tuesday, just 6 days ago. "It's just temporary, Mom, I swear. As soon as Marcus's business gets off the ground, we'll pay you back for everything. You know we're good for it." Good for it. In 3 years of temporary assistance, I hadn't seen a single dollar repaid, yet every month seemed to bring a new temporary crisis. A new reason why this time was different. Why this was the very last time she would ever have to ask. I pressed the heel of my palm against my forehead. The IV line pulled, sending a sharp twinge up my arm. How many times had I made excuses for them? How many red flags had I willfully painted green out of a desperate need to believe that my daughter still needed her mother for something more than her bank account balance? The door creaked open, and Sarah stepped back into the room, checking her watch. "How are you feeling, Ms. Gable?" "Fine," I replied automatically. "Just thinking." She moved toward the monitors, her presence a strange mix of comfort and professional distance. Here was a stranger providing me with care, while my own family was celebrating my health crisis with fancy drinks and cruel jokes. "Your daughter called the main reception desk about an hour ago," Sarah mentioned, making notes on a tablet. "She was asking about visiting hours." My heart rate jumped, and the monitor instantly betrayed me with its accelerated beeping. "What did you tell her?" "That you were resting but in stable condition." She sounded relieved. Sarah glanced at me, her kind eyes having seen too many families receive bad news. "She'll likely come visit tomorrow." "Tomorrow." "Of course." Tomorrow, she would play the part of the devoted, concerned daughter. She would ask all the right questions. Perhaps even bring a bouquet of flowers. Flowers that I would, in one way or another, end up paying for. I thought about the old coffee canister in my kitchen. The one where I stashed emergency cash. Had she taken money from that too? The spare key I had given her was for emergencies, I had told her. Medical emergencies, household disasters, times when she truly needed her mother, not for shopping sprees while I was fighting for my life. The realization struck me like a second, more painful heart attack. I had to go home. I needed to see what else had been taken, to understand the full extent of the violation that had occurred while I lay unconscious. If she felt comfortable enough to celebrate my hospitalization, what else had she felt comfortable enough to steal? Sarah finished her rounds and headed for the door. Try to rest, Miss Gable. Tomorrow will be busy with all the discharge paperwork. Discharge. Home. I waited until the sound of her footsteps faded down the corridor. Then I reached for the drawer, where they had stored my wallet and keys. A taxi dropped me at the curb just before 10:00 the next morning. From the outside, my house looked exactly as I had left it. The same faded blue shutters, the same mailbox leaning ever so slightly to the left, the same crack in the front walkway that I had been meaning to repair for months. But the moment I turned the key in the lock, I knew something was different. The air inside was tinged with a faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine. It was Clara's perfume, the expensive kind she claimed she couldn't afford but always seemed to be wearing. I placed my keys on the small table in the entryway, in the exact spot I had been using for 23 years, and listened. The house was empty now, but it hadn't been empty yesterday. Someone had been here, moving through my private spaces, touching my belongings. At first glance, the living room seemed untouched. The same worn leather armchair, where I read the evening news, was in its usual spot. The same stack of gardening magazines sat on the coffee table, but the antique coin collection I kept hidden behind a set of World War II history books was gone. It represented 3 generations of collecting, including a 1,909 penny my own father had given me when I was 12. My legs suddenly felt weak, whether from the heart attack or this discovery, I couldn't be sure. I made my way into the kitchen, steadying myself against the wall. The coffee canister was on its usual shelf, but it was positioned about 3 inches to the left of where I always kept it. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. $200 was missing from the $400 I kept for emergencies. She had taken exactly half, likely assuming I wouldn't notice the difference. Or perhaps, she simply no longer cared if I did. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the canister's position, and then another of the empty space behind the books on the shelf. Evidence. It was an engineer's habit, documenting a problem before attempting to solve it. The door to my study was slightly ajar. I never left it ajar. I pushed it open and walked directly to my desk, to the bottom drawer where I kept all my important documents. The drawer wasn't completely shut, another small detail that I would have noticed under any other circumstances. Inside, my files had been rummaged through, with the casual carelessness of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Birth certificates, insurance policies, investment statements, everything was there. But it had all been disturbed, examined, assessed. She had been shopping for something. The only question was whether she had found it. My late husband Robert's watch was missing from the top of my bedroom dresser. It was the Omega he had worn every day for 40 years. The one he had taken from his own wrist and placed in my palm the day before he died. "Take care of this, sweetheart," he had said, "and take care of your mother." I sank onto the bed, the mattress groaning under my weight. To anyone else, the watch wasn't particularly valuable, maybe a few $100s at a pawn shop. But to me, it was priceless, irreplaceable. And Clara knew that. I walked through the house again, much more slowly this time, taking a mental inventory of everything I had missed on my first pass. It was mostly small things. a silver letter opener from the junk drawer in the kitchen, the good fountain pen from my desk. Robert's old jewelry box had been opened, though most of its contents were still there. Clara had only taken items that would be easy to sell quickly and without raising questions. She had been methodical, almost professional. This wasn't the work of someone in a desperate scramble for cash. This had been planned, calculated. She had taken her time, deciding what to take, what would be missed right away, versus what might go unnoticed for weeks. While I had been lying in a hospital bed, fighting for my life, hooked up to a symphony of machines in a sterile room, my own daughter had been in my home, evaluating my possessions not like a thief, but like an appraiser preparing for an estate sale. The thought struck me with a sickening certainty. She hadn't just been stealing from me. She had been preparing, taking stock of what I owned, what it was worth, and how she could access it. This was no longer about temporary financial help. This was about finding a permanent solution to her money problems. I returned to the kitchen and opened the coffee canister again. Half the emergency money was gone, but not all of it. She was being cautious, pacing herself, testing the waters to see how much she could take without raising my suspicions. But I was suspicious now. I was far beyond suspicious. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the garage door. It was time to have a conversation with my daughter. It was time to see how well she could lie to my face, not knowing that I had already uncovered the truth. The drive to Oak Avenue would take 20 minutes. 20 minutes to decide what kind of mother I was going to be when I arrived. Clara's rental house looked even shabbier than I remembered. The front lawn was overgrown with weeds, and the porch steps sagged wearily. My own house, the one I had worked for 30 years to pay off, could have fit this entire property in its backyard. And yet, somehow, they still needed my money to get by. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the front window, I saw a flicker of movement. Clara walking past, wearing what looked to be a very nice dress, not the attire of someone who had spent the previous day consumed with worry over her mother's medical crisis. The front door swung open before I had even reached the porch. "Mom?" Clara's face instantly contorted into a mask of deep concern. A performance so flawlessly executed, it would have completely fooled me just yesterday. "Oh, thank goodness. How are you feeling? I am so sorry I couldn't get to the hospital right away. Why couldn't you answer your phone? I called you several times." She stepped back to allow me inside, her hand fluttering to her chest in a gesture I recognized from 1,000 childhood lies. "I told the nurse my phone broke yesterday morning. Can you believe it? I dropped it right into the kitchen sink." The living room was small and cluttered but tidy, furnished with pieces that had clearly seen better days. Marcus's design supplies were spread over a small table in the corner, but he was nowhere in sight. "When exactly did your phone break?" I asked, remaining standing by the door. I noted that she didn't offer me a seat or ask if I wanted a glass of water. "Around 10, I think. I was washing dishes, just being my clumsy self." She offered a weak laugh that sounded hollow. "You know how I get when I'm stressed out about you, Mom. So, you were aware that I was in the hospital, but you couldn't come because your phone was broken?" "Well, no, not exactly." Clara moved toward the window, needlessly adjusting the curtains. "The nurse called our landline. Did you even know we still had one? I'd completely forgotten about it, but by the time she called, she said you were stable and resting. I thought you'd rather I take care of practical things here, instead of just sitting around a hospital room, worrying myself sick." I watched her face as she spoke, observing the slight flush that colored her cheeks and the way her eyes darted around, avoiding mine. "Since when do you prioritize practical things over worrying? The last time I had chest pains, you wanted to call an ambulance for what turned out to be heartburn. That was different," she said, a little too quickly. "You know how you can sometimes dramatize situations, Mom. I'm learning to be more rational in my assessments." Dramatize? There was that word again. The exact same word Marcus had used in his celebratory post. It was a word they had clearly discussed, a word they had planned to use if I questioned their absence during my crisis. "Where's Marcus?" I asked. "He has a job interview downtown. He finally got a call back from that design firm I told you about." She moved toward the kitchen counter, where I could see a brand new phone, still in its original packaging. The receipt lying next to it was time-stamped from this morning at 9:15 a.m. How interesting. Her phone had supposedly broken at 10:00 yesterday morning. Yet she had only managed to replace it this morning, conveniently after the hospital drama had subsided. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale," Clara said, approaching me with what appeared to be genuine concern. But in the last 24 hours, I had learned to question every one of her expressions. "Just tired. Heart surgery really takes it out of you." "Of course it does." She touched my arm for a fleeting moment, a gesture that felt more performative than affectionate. "You should probably go home and get some rest instead of driving all over town checking on everyone else." Everyone else. As if I made a regular habit of checking up on people after my own major medical events. As if this wasn't the first time I had seen her since my hospitalization, the first time she had even bothered to look at me since I had nearly died. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't too worried," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I know how family emergencies can upset you. I appreciate that, Mom. I really do. But you know how I am about hospitals. Ever since, well, since Dad." She let her voice trail off, allowing the implication to hang in the air between us, using Robert's death as a shield, just as she had used it to justify taking my money. "Right," I said. "Well, I should probably get going. Let you get back to your day." A flicker of relief passed over her face, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. She wanted me gone. She had probably been watching the clock since the moment I arrived, calculating how much longer she needed to keep up this charade. "Call me if you need anything," she said, walking me to the door with an unnecessary sense of urgency. "And Mom, try not to worry so much. You know how stress is bad for your heart." I paused on her front step and looked back at her, framed in the doorway. Yesterday, I would have seen a loving daughter, concerned for her mother's health. Today, I saw something else entirely. "I'll try to keep the drama to a minimum," I said. Her smile faltered for just a second. "What?" "Oh, nothing. Just something I heard someone say." I turned and walked toward my car, feeling her eyes on my back until I heard the soft, final click of her front door closing. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of her in my rear-view mirror, already pulling out her new phone. She was probably texting Marcus, telling him that the old woman had bought her story, that the crisis was over. But the crisis had only just begun. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every red light provided another moment for me to replay Clara's performance in my mind. I pulled into my driveway and sat for several minutes, the engine ticking, watching the afternoon shadows stretch across my lawn. The ache in my chest persisted. Whether it was from the heart attack or from something far deeper, I could no longer tell. Getting out of the car took more effort than usual. The medication made me feel strangely disconnected from my own body, as if I were operating a piece of heavy machinery I didn't fully understand. I fumbled with my keys, my hand guided by muscle memory toward the front door. "Hiram!" Mrs. Peterson's voice carried across the narrow strip of grass that separated our driveways. She was hurrying over from her front yard, where she had clearly been waiting for me to return. At 50, Mrs. Peterson's Bray. Peterson possessed a restless energy that made her the unofficial news service of the neighborhood. "Thank goodness you're all right. When I heard you were in the hospital, I was so worried." "You heard about that?" I turned to face her, noticing the eager glint in her eyes that always appeared when she had information to share. "Well, Your Clara has been telling everyone about your heart attack. Mrs. Peterson's expression shifted subtly, as if she were choosing her next words with great care. She seemed, well, not quite as worried as one would expect a daughter to be. A cold knot formed in my stomach. What exactly has she been saying? Oh dear, I probably shouldn't be repeating neighborhood gossip, but... She glanced around as if checking for spies, then leaned in closer. She and that fiancé of hers have been talking about how your heart is failing, how you probably don't have much time left. The keys dug into my palm where I was gripping them too tightly. They said that? Not in those exact words, but the implication was crystal clear. And Hiram, Mrs. Peterson's voice dropped to what she likely considered a whisper. They've even been discussing what they'll do with this beautiful house once they inherit it, planning renovations, talking about selling it for the lot value. I felt the world tilt slightly. I reached out and gripped the car door frame, steadying myself against a weakness that was more than just physical. When did you hear this? Just yesterday morning, actually. I was getting my mail when they walked by, on their usual stroll through the neighborhood. You know how they love to look at the nicer houses. They were discussing square footage and property values as if they were already measuring for new furniture. I thought it was terribly premature, but Marcus said something about your week ticker, making it a matter of when, not if. Yesterday morning, while I was unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for every breath, my daughter and her fiancé had been taking inventory walks through my neighborhood, planning my estate sale. I do hope I haven't upset you, Mrs. Peterson continued, clearly aware that my expression had changed. I just thought the timing was rather odd. You know, most children would be focused on their parents' recovery, not on other things. No, I said, the words feeling like they were coming from someone else's mouth. I appreciate you telling me. I should probably get inside and rest. Of course. You look utterly exhausted, you poor thing. Please, let me know if you need anything at all. Groceries, a ride to an appointment, anything. She patted my arm with a genuine kindness that was completely unaware of the fact that she had just delivered the final, fatal blow to what little remained of my relationship with my daughter. I managed to wave goodbye and walk to my front door without stumbling. Behind me, I heard Mrs. Ludis, Peterson's footsteps retreating to her own yard, probably already composing the story she would tell her next neighbor about how pale and shaken Hiram Gable had looked when she shared the neighborhood news. The key turned easily in the lock, but every action beyond that simple one felt impossibly heavy. I stepped into my house, the house that Clara and Marcus had already divided up in their minds. The house they had discussed selling before my body had even had a chance to grow cold and close the door behind me. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I was truly alone with the complete, horrifying picture of my daughter's betrayal. And for the first time in my 68 years, I knew exactly what I had to do. By 8 o'clock that evening, I had moved through my house like a ghost haunting her own life. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the kitchen counter, long gone stale, but I couldn't muster any interest in food. Every room I entered held evidence of the sacrifices I had made, the love I had given, and the trust that had been so systematically exploited. Robert's portrait smiled down at me from the mantelpiece, his gentle expression having been a source of comfort through 3 long years of widowhood. What would he think of our daughter now? What would he say about the woman Clara had become? Or perhaps, the woman she had always been, just beneath the surface. I remembered Robert's words to me on Clara's wedding day. She's beautiful, isn't she? But Hiram, promise me you'll be careful. Sometimes I worry that she sees kindness as weakness, generosity as stupidity. I had laughed it off at the time. Robert was just being an overprotective father, maybe a little jealous of having to share our daughter with Marcus. But Robert had seen something in her that I had missed, a fundamental coldness that I had chosen to explain away as independence, as strength, as modern thinking. the college tuition I paid for when my retirement account took its biggest hit, the wedding expenses we covered when Robert was already sick and the medical bills were piling up, the endless stream of emergencies that always required immediate financial intervention. Each time, Clara had managed to make it seem as though I were the hero, the savior, the irreplaceable mother who always came to the rescue. But I wasn't irreplaceable at all. I was just useful, a walking ATM with a sentimental streak and a weak heart. Moving to the window, I looked out in the direction of Oak Avenue, though I couldn't see Clara's rental house from here. She was likely there right now, perhaps on the phone with Marcus, discussing how suspicious I had seemed during our conversation. Were they worried that I had figured something out? Or did they simply assume I was still the same naive fool who had been bankrolling their lives for years? The neighborhood gossip Mrs. Peterson had shared played on a loop in my mind. Planning changes to my house, discussing property values, calling my heart a weak ticker, and debating when, not if, it would finally give out. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively counting on it, planning for it, depending on it to solve their financial problems for good. I walked into my study and pulled open the filing cabinet where I kept all my important documents, the house deed, insurance policies, investment statements, all the papers that represented a lifetime of hard work, careful saving, and meticulous planning. All the assets that Clara assumed would one day flow to her as an inevitable inheritance. But inheritance requires a death. And despite what my daughter and her fiancé might have hoped, I wasn't dead yet. Sitting back in my leather chair, I felt something shift deep inside my chest. It wasn't physical pain this time, but something harder, colder, settling into the space where trust and love used to reside. If Clara could be so practical about my death, then I could be just as practical about my life. She had taught me the rules of this new game we were playing. Money was more important than love. Planning was more important than grief. And self-interest trumped family loyalty every single time. Fine. I was a quick study, especially when the lesson involved an engineering problem. And this was, at its core, an engineering problem. How to redistribute resources in a way that would achieve the most desirable outcome. And the most desirable outcome was justice. The resources were everything I had worked for, everything I had saved, everything Clara assumed would one day be hers. Outside, night had fallen. The house felt different now, less like a home, and more like a tool, the most valuable tool in my arsenal for teaching my daughter that some assumptions come with a very steep price. I pulled out my old-fashioned address book. With its handwritten entries and smudged phone numbers, David Burton's information was right where I had written it 15 years ago, complete with his home and office numbers. Tomorrow morning, I would make a phone call that would change everything. Tonight, for the first time in years, I would sleep soundly, knowing that for once in this relationship, I would be the one setting the terms. Clara wanted to plan my funeral. Instead, she was about to attend the burial of her financial future. Saturday morning arrived with an unexpected clarity. I had slept for 7 uninterrupted hours, more than I had managed in a single night since Robert died. There were no anxiety-ridden dreams, no sudden chest pains in the middle of the night, just the deep, restorative sleep of a woman who had finally stopped fighting a truth she could no longer deny. The coffee tasted richer than it had in days. Even the simple act of buttering a piece of toast felt purposeful. I moved through my morning routine with the focused efficiency of someone preparing for an important meeting, because that's precisely what I was doing. David Burton's business card sat propped against the sugar bowl, where I had placed it the night before. He had been trying to convince me to sell this house for the better part of a decade, always with the same logical arguments. It was too much space for one person, too much maintenance, too much equity sitting dormant when I could be liquid and mobile. I had always refused, of course. This was the house where Robert and I had built our life together, where Clara had taken her first steps, where Christmas mornings had echoed with laughter. You don't sell memories. But memories weren't paying for Clara's celebratory cocktails while I fought for my life. Memories weren't funding her shopping trips through my neighborhood as she calculated property values. Memories weren't protecting me from my own daughter's greed. At precisely 9:00 a.m., I dialed David's home number. Burton Residence. His voice was crisp and professional. Even on a Saturday morning. David? It's Hiram Gable. I hope I'm not calling too early. Hiram! The warmth in his voice was immediate and genuine. Never too early for an old friend. How are you feeling? I heard through the grapevine about your hospital stay. Hi, I'm recovering well, thank you. Actually, that's part of the reason I'm calling. I took a steadying breath. You know how you've been telling me for years that I should sell this house? There was a brief pause. For about 10 years running? Yes. Are you finally ready to listen to reason and downsize? Something like that. How quickly could you move on a sale if I were serious about it? In this market, Hiram? I could have 3 families in a bidding war by Tuesday. Your neighborhood is gold right now. Young professionals moving out from the city. Families looking for established areas with character. His excitement was palpable, growing with each word. But are you sure about this? It's a major decision. I'm sure that I need cash, David. How fast can you make that happen? A cash sale? Well, that depends on the buyer. But I know investors who could close within a week if the property is clean, which yours absolutely is. I've been watching you maintain that place like a museum for decades. He paused, and I could almost hear him shifting into business mode. What kind of timeline are we talking about? 1 week. Less if possible. Hiram, what's the rush? If you don't mind my asking, usually when someone wants to sell their family home this quickly, let's just say I've had some recent revelations about family priorities. I want to make sure my assets are directed where they'll do the most good, while I'm still alive to see it. Ah, David's tone suggested he understood far more than I was explicitly saying. Well, you won't get any argument from me on that philosophy. And frankly, you're sitting on a gold mine. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. That beautiful original hardwood, the mature landscaping. In this market, we're talking serious money. How serious? A ballpark figure? 400. Maybe even 450. If we can get a bidding war started. The lot alone is worth nearly half that. Developers are snapping up properties in your area like crazy. $400,000. More than enough to disappear. To start over somewhere. Clara would never think to look. More than enough to ensure that her inheritance plans became purely academic. When can we get started? I asked. I can be over this afternoon with the paperwork. We'll need to take some photos, get a professional assessment. Maybe I can make some minor staging recommendations. He added. But Hiram, once we list this thing, there's no going back. The market moves incredibly fast. I'm counting on it. All right then. This is exciting, my friend. You're going to love the freedom that comes with cutting loose from all that responsibility. Where are you thinking of relocating? I looked around my kitchen. At the window where I used to watch Robert tend to his garden. At the breakfast nook where Clara would eat her cereal before school. In a week, none of it would be mine. In a week, Clara's inheritance would vanish like morning mist. I haven't decided yet, I said, but somewhere far enough away to start fresh. Perfect. I'll see you at 2 o'clock sharp. And Hiram? You're doing the right thing. Life's too short to be tied down by property when you could be out there living it. After I hung up the phone, I sat perfectly still for several minutes, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, settling around me. Somewhere across town, Clara was probably planning her day, perhaps discussing with Marcus how much longer they would have to wait for their windfall. Maybe even calculating the monthly payments on the debt they had undoubtedly accumulated in anticipation of my death. They were about to learn that anticipation and reality are two very different things. At 2:00 p.m., my house would officially be on the market. By next weekend, it would belong to someone else entirely. And by then, I would be gone. Not dead, as my daughter had so clearly hoped, but free in a way I hadn't been since the day I first decided that being a good mother meant being a foolish one. The phone rang in my hand, startling me. Clara's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring. The week that followed my call to David moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Monday was spent signing documents at his office. Tuesday saw the first showing, and by Wednesday, we had serious buyers, the Millers, John and Lisa, and their 4-year-old daughter, Sophie, fell in love with the house the moment they walked through the front door. "Ms. Gable, this house has been so beautifully maintained," John said, running his hand along the original crown molding in the living room. His wife was already in the kitchen, opening cabinets and admiring the vintage tile work Robert had chosen 20 years ago. "You can just tell it's been a truly loved home," Lisa added, peering out the window into the backyard, where Sophie was already spinning in circles on the grass. "Sophie would have so much space to play here. There's room for a swing set, maybe even a small garden." I watched the little girl through the window, remembering when Clara had been that age, playing in that very same yard with that same innocent joy, before money had become more important than love, before manipulation had become her second nature. "The neighborhood is perfect for families," I told them. "Good schools, quiet streets, and neighbors who genuinely care about each other." The inspection on Thursday revealed only minor issues. A loose shutter, some weather stripping that needed replacing, nothing that would slow down the process. By Friday, we were all sitting in the closing attorney's office, signing the papers that would transfer ownership of my family home to people who truly deserved it. David handled the technical details with his usual efficiency, but I caught him watching me with a look of concern during the more emotional moments. When the attorney slid the cashier's check across the table, $435,000, more than I had ever imagined the house was worth, my hand was perfectly steady as I accepted it. "I've never seen a sale move this smoothly," David murmured as we gathered our papers. "Are you absolutely certain about this decision?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The key ceremony took place on the front porch. Sophie danced around her parents' legs as I handed over the house keys. It was such a simple gesture, a piece of metal changing hands, but it represented the complete transformation of my life. "We'll take wonderful care of it," Lisa promised, accepting the keys with both hands as if they were made of crystal. "I know you will," I said, and I meant it. This house deserves to hear the sound of children's laughter again. Later, after the Millers had driven away to begin planning their move, I stood alone on the sidewalk, looking at the house that was no longer mine. The late afternoon sun caught the windows just right, making them glow like warm amber. Robert would have understood this decision. He always said that houses were for living in, not just existing. My phone buzzed with a text message from the hotel where I had been staying. "Room confirmed for another week while you finalize relocation plans." Perfect. By the time Clara discovered what had happened, I would be long gone. By the time she realized her inheritance had evaporated, I would already be building a new life somewhere she would never think to find me. I got into my car, the same car I had driven to the hospital just 8 days ago. A naive mother who still trusted in her daughter's love. The woman driving away from Elm Street was someone entirely different. Someone who had learned that sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to change the rules completely. In my rearview mirror, I watched the Millers' car pull up to their new home. Sophie's excited face pressed against the window. The future belonged to families like theirs, honest, hopeful, and genuinely caring. The past, with all its lies, manipulations, and calculated betrayals, belonged to someone else now. Sunday morning arrived with an unseasonable crispness. the kind of bright, clear sky that makes everything look sharper than usual. I was finishing my coffee in my hotel room when the phone rang. Seeing Clara's name on the screen made me smile for the first time in over a week. "Mom." Her voice was tight, controlled, dangerous. "We need to talk. Right now." "Good morning to you too, sweetheart. How can I help you?" "Don't play games with me. I just drove by the house. There are strangers in our yard, Mom. Strangers with moving trucks and children's toys." "What did you do?" "I sold it. Yesterday, actually. A lovely family, the Millers. They'll take much better care of it than you would have." "You sold our house without telling me? Without even discussing it with your family?" Her voice was rising, climbing toward hysteria with each sharp word. "My house, Clara. My name was on the deed. And yes, I sold it. For quite a bit more than I expected, thanks to this market. Meet me there right now. We are going to fix this." 20 minutes later, I parked across the street from my former home and watched the scene unfold. Clara was on the front lawn, gesturing frantically at John Miller, while his wife, Lisa, held their daughter Sophie protectively behind her. Even from a distance, I could see the utter confusion on their faces, the way they kept glancing toward their new house, as if questioning their own right to be there. I crossed the street with measured steps, my heart rate steady for the first time in days. "Clara," my voice cut through her tirade like a knife. "Step away from these nice people." She spun around to face me, and I saw something in my daughter's expression I had never seen before. Pure, undiluted rage, mixed with a healthy dose of genuine fear. "Mom, tell them this is all a mistake. Tell them you're not competent to make these kinds of decisions. Tell them." John Miller stepped forward, his arm protectively around his wife's shoulders. "Ms. Gable, is there some kind of problem we should know about?" "No problem at all," I said calmly. "Just a little family disagreement. My daughter seems to have forgotten that children don't inherit their parents' property until their parents are actually dead." Clara's face went white. "You can't do this to us. We had plans. We were counting on." "On my death?" I finished for her. "Yes. I heard all about your plans. Mrs. Peterson mentioned how you and Marcus were discussing my timeline with the neighbors. Something about my weak ticker and property values." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, the calculation visible in her eyes as she desperately searched for a new angle of attack. "We're going inside," Lisa Miller said quietly to her husband. "Sophie, come on, honey." They disappeared through the front door that had been mine just yesterday morning, leaving Clara and me alone on the sidewalk. "You don't understand the pressure we're under," she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Stop, just stop." I looked at this woman who shared my blood, who had once been my greatest joy, and who had systematically betrayed every single kindness I had ever shown her. "I saw Marcus's post, Clara. While I was in the hospital, fighting for my life, he was celebrating a day without the drama queen. You told the hospital you were too busy to come, too busy to check on your dying mother." Her mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. "You're twisting everything. You're being dramatic." I smiled, and she flinched. "That seems to be your favorite word for me lately. Well, here's some drama for you. I'm alive. I'm healthy, and I'm not waiting around for your inheritance timeline anymore. You can't just cut us out. I'm your daughter. You cut yourself out the moment you decided my death was more valuable than my life." I turned to walk back to my car, then paused. "Oh, and Clara? Next time you decide to plan someone's funeral, you might want to make sure they're actually dead first." She just stood there on the sidewalk that was no longer hers, in front of the house that would never be hers, looking smaller and more powerless than I had ever seen her. There was no more manipulation, no more crocodile tears, No more emotional blackmail using her father's memory. There was just a greedy woman who had gambled everything on her mother's weakness and had lost spectacularly. I drove away without looking back, leaving her to explain to Marcus how their foolproof inheritance plan had just evaporated in the bright spring sunshine. 3 months later, I sat in my new apartment in Asheville, watching the French Broad River flow past my window. The coffee in my hands had grown cold as I contemplated the strange turns a life can take. The apartment was smaller than my old house, but it was infinitely more peaceful. It was modern, efficient, and mine by choice, not by an accident of marriage and parenthood. The calendar on my kitchen counter showed June 15th. It was Clara's 36th birthday. For 35 years, I had maintained the tradition of calling her first thing on her birthday morning, usually to arrange dinner or a gift exchange. This year felt different. This year, the call was about maintaining boundaries, not expressing love. She answered on the fourth ring. "Hello, Mom." Her voice was carefully neutral, professionally polite. We had spoken only twice since the sale of the house. Once, when she had tried to bring Marcus over to guilt-trip me into doing the right thing, and once when she had called, crying, about their financial struggles. Both conversations had been mercifully brief. "Happy birthday, Clara." "Thank you. How are you managing?" There was a pause. "We're fine." "No thanks to you." "I'm glad to hear you're doing well," I said. And surprisingly, I meant it. "I won't keep you long. I know you're busy, Mom." She started to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. "Is that all?" I looked around my apartment, at the books I was reading for pleasure instead of necessity, at the new fishing gear I had bought for weekend trips to the lake, at the conspicuous absence of the family photos that had once cluttered every available surface. Peace looked different than I had expected, but it felt exactly right. "Just one more thing," I said. "Try not to be so dramatic, sweetheart." Silence stretched across the line for nearly 10 seconds. Then, she hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down and returned to my coffee, which had somehow stayed warmer than I expected. Through the window, a young family was walking along the riverside path. The parents were pushing a stroller, and an older child was running ahead, flying a kite. They looked happy in that uncomplicated way that Clara and I had never quite managed to achieve. The drama queen has abdicated, I thought, watching the kite catch the wind and soar higher. Long live the quiet queen. For the first time in 68 years, I was exactly where I chose to be, surrounded by exactly the people I chose to have in my life. The inheritance Clara had been planning on was gone, but in her greed, she had inadvertently given me something far more valuable. The knowledge that I didn't have to be anyone's victim, not even my own daughter's. I picked up the newspaper and turned to the crossword puzzle, humming softly to myself. Outside, the river kept flowing toward whatever came next, carrying away everything that no longer served the journey. Sometimes, the only way to save a relationship is to end it. Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to succeed or fail entirely on their own merits. And sometimes, if you are very, very lucky, you discover that the life you thought was ending was actually just beginning.